Thank you for joining us on Mirage. This is Brown and Yellow, and today we're going to be speculating on Sabaa Tahir. And joining me is M.L. Moos.
Honestly, for the most part, it was her main character in her first book, An Ember in the Ashes.
Ember
She
and
just
the
seemed.
Ashes.
Yep, that's her debut novel.
This is a not kids book, but a young adult book, right?
Yeah, YA fantasy.
What is it about the character that spoke to you exactly? I have not read her work, unfortunately. I'm
Well,
very interested. I just watched like a bunch of interviews with her and Patrick Rufus, his name is. And she's very
right.
well spoken. She looks very interesting as a person. She grew up in the Mojave Desert, of all places.
That does not
Pakistan,
surprise me.
right? Why not?
Well, one of the characters also grew up in sort of a desert environment. So.
Oh, really? Does she speak about it lovingly, or is it more of like a torturous place?
It's honestly, as environments go, it's very complex. So there are parts of it that are amazing and intriguing and exciting, and then there are other parts of it that are less so, but no more so than any other environment you'd find yourself in.
It's very interesting. And Layla, Laia,
Laya.
Laia, and that is
I
the
believe.
main character of An Amber in the Ashes.
Yep.
And what about her appeals to you so much?
Um. Well, first of all, as far as I can tell, Sabaa Tahir seems to be mostly applauded for making a brown-skinned character a main character,
Mm,
and writing a book, you know, revolved around very ethnically diverse characters. But I think what drew me to her main character primarily is actually um, just the fact that she's not your typical YA heroine, like like Alana, like Tamora Pierce's Alana, or Katniss, or Triss from the Divergent series. Like they all seem to be very go get 'em, tough, act without
mm,
thinking kind of characters.
mm-hmm.
Whereas Laya is just so much different from that. I mean, whereas a lot of YA heroines are naturally brave, naturally, you know, jump in without thinking and stick out your neck even if your neck isn't even long enough sort of characters.
Mm-hmm.
She's I mean, I hesitate to call her a coward, but at the start of her story she kind of is a bit cowardly,
Mm-hmm.
which was so fascinating to me. So like when she starts off, she's just a normal girl with a normal, simple, if however not necessarily easy life. I mean, she's always had family to look after her and help her with difficult decisions and all of that, which I feel like a lot of young girls today can probably relate to. And then she finds herself forced into a situation where she only has herself. So whereas granted a lot of young women um, have obviously grown up in difficult life situations and have had to fight on their own from a young age, but there are also a lot of young girls that.
Uh-oh, you still there?
so
Oh, there you are. You
so
kind of broke up on me for a second.
oh, sorry.
It's okay. I mean, it kind of sounds like she grew up well. She was a scholar living with her grandparents and under I guess it's the Marshall Empire, right? Kind of a brutal type regime. And she's kind of a
Right.
normal girl, but she's thrust into a dangerous situation that she has to reach deep within herself to become something more to defeat it.
Right. And I think what drew me to her was that she's not just thrust into a situation and suddenly she has to be brave. It's that she is learning how to fix things on her own for the first time in her life.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time she's ever had to rely on just herself
It's
to
interesting.
make it on, to fix the situation and to keep going. And that, for me personally, that really impacted me quite a bit, because because that's kind of how I grew up. Like, I had my family around me, and I never, when I first stepped out after graduating high school and, you know, tried to make a life for myself, that's a scary situation,
Yeah.
especially when you've never had to be on your own before. So the fact that she is going through that same experience, granted in a much, more extreme sort of
Well,
situation.
in a fantasy environment too, right? I mean,
Exactly. It's, fantasy in general is sort of the extreme of, humanity to a certain extent. So
does she have magic? Is there magic in these books?
there is quite a bit of magic. It's mostly pretty mysterious within book one, but it's definitely there, and it definitely has an impact on the story,
Hmm.
though not necessarily on Laya herself so much in book one.
So, you were most interested in discussing the character, but it's very interesting if you look at the author herself too, and where she's coming from. I mean, I don't know. I've only been through the Mojave Desert, never really stopped there. I think there's a, a town that sounds scary. I've heard like there's a bunch of meth in that area, and it's not, it's not a fun place to be. And yet
Hmm.
here's this young woman, a young girl, right? She grew up her entire life there, basically. Her family's from Pakistan, and
Hmm.
she grows up in a little tiny motel in this desert wasteland. Basically, I don't know. Forgive me, whoever's listening who lives in the Mojave Desert, and it's not a desert wasteland, but in my mind, it is. I mean, it's kind of interesting how wherever she goes, she's probably a standout, right? I mean, she probably doesn't fit in. Would you say, or would you think that does
Uh,
that correlate to this character?
um, Perhaps a bit. It's part of the conflict involves two different people with two very different backgrounds coming together and learning how to relate to each other and connect to each other
Hmm.
despite their differences. So there's probably a part of it.
Cultural differences.
Yes, yeah, very, very differing cultural differences.
It's very interesting. I mean, in terms of her as an author, as a person, watching interviews with her, she's kind of very cool. You know, she wears t-shirts. She calls herself a music girl. And I don't know whether or not that kind of fits the whole being from Pakistan thing.
I'm Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how much of that. I'm not quite sure exactly how much of her background she's pulled into her books. Um,
Here's the thing, when you look online, it doesn't seem like there's any of her background anywhere. I mean, you know where she went to school, UCLA, you know that she got a job at the Washington Post, but
mhm.
beyond that, you're not sure if she's married, if she has boyfriends, girlfriends, what have you, what her religious affiliation is, or anything like that, other than she is the author of these books. I mean, that's just her Wikipedia page. She's
Mhm.
kind of like a mysterious element to these
Mhm.
novels, and now
Well, I
they're being
wouldn't
made
I
into
wouldn't be
movies and
surprised
stuff.
if part of that is okay. I'm having a lot of thoughts here, which I'm having a hard time making entirely PC. Um, but well, because part of it is maybe the need to have your book stand alone, you know? So, whereas I applaud her for featuring a dark skinned character, because there definitely needs to be more of that within, especially the YA market. Um, but I also appreciate that the book itself stands on its own. So, whether,
It
I
goes
mean, I mean,
beyond whether or not the character is dark skin or light skin or whatever have you. It's just a good
well, and
character
even
with the
and
description.
even more than that, it's not. Like, you don't read it and think, oh yes, clearly she is drawing from her Pakistani background, from, you know, from her culture, from whatever she grew up with. it's it's its own entity, which I personally can really appreciate, because that it's less about the author and more about what the product that the author is offering,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense.
I understand. And she's written a book. She's trying to sell that book, and she definitely uses herself to sell her literature, her fantasy series. I mean, she's all over the place in terms of interviews and whatnot, and she's very open to discussing the process of the writing
Mm-hmm.
and what have you. What were some of the? I mean, not to let you. I don't want you to be, you know, not politically correct, but I mean, what were kind of some of the gist of the ideas that you were coming at in terms of that?
Well, just that I mean, it's one thing to write a diverse book with diverse characters, and to write um, being inspired by your own unique um, experiences and culture and all of that. But it's a completely other thing to write a good book.
Yeah, and
That
she's
makes
done that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's there's I'm just I okay, being a Caucasian woman, um, I I hesitate to say these sort of things because I know I I don't have the sort of experience to it's really hard to know how to word these things in a way that doesn't sound.
Well, I think the most important thing
I'm
is
not trying. I'm
just
not. Excuse
say
me. I'm
it,
not trying. I'm trying
and
not.
we'll
I'm not.
discuss it.
I'm not trying to be offensive to those who are seeking to write a diverse book, because there needs to be more of that in the market. But it's in my mind, it's not quite enough to just write a book because it's diverse. You need to also write a good book. So the fact that she has written an excellent book on its own, um, in my mind, puts it on a higher level than a lot of other
Well, I
books
would
that are.
also think that she's not like setting out going, I'm going to write a diverse book.
Exactly, and
She's
that's
not trying to do that. I mean, she's trying to write a book, a good story,
right.
and she did that, like we were talking about. But her character just happens to be of a particular, not, I don't know this world that she's actually built, but a racial makeup that we can imagine being Pakistani, or that Middle Eastern descent, or
Well, it's
I
just that
can't remember the.
a lot of YA fantasy is, for the most part, anchored within, like, more Western cultures.
Yeah, and there's a big
Eastern European sort of
hmm
folklore and
hmm
that sort of thing. So to be
European, a lot
drawing
of people say.
from diverse cultures
Yeah, and there's a lot
is
of movement right now in the literary world to pull voices like hers out. If you go on Tor's website, they're begging for fantasy that is not being written from a white male European standpoint. They
right,
want
exactly.
things. They want Native American fantasy. They want Mexican fantasy. They want more diversity in their voices.
Heck,
And it's not really
you
like
know,
you were just talking about. It's not diversity. It's just taking a perspective because you have one and writing a good story from it.
right, right.
So this character struggles with being unique in her world, or is she a part of a world where she is not unique?
Um, it's part of it is her. Well, I don't know that it's so much revolved around whether she's unique or not, but more that she is she's placed in a position where she is the only one who can help, and she's learning how to be that anchor point. She's learning how to be the person who can bring about all of this change
Hmm.
when she's never had that kind of impact before. So it's not so much about her being unique within a very diverse world, so much as she's always. I mean, it's sort of it's a there is a slight hint of the hero's journey, kind of, at least in that element, in that she is, the servant, the farmer, the nobody who ends up becoming more. And I just love that in this book, um, Sabaa Tahir has focused so much on that character growth, on going from being someone who has never mattered, whose mistakes had never had such a huge impact, to being someone who can have that impact and learning how to step up.
It's interesting because mistakes aren't necessarily death. They can be, but they don't have to be. Mistakes are
Right.
things that you learn from, and they're a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic element to the hero's journey because you want your hero to fall on his face or her face and then get back up again and try harder the next time.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, if what do they call it, a Mary Sue, where everything kind of just works out for them and they don't have to actually fail at anything. Kind
Right.
of boring writing. I mean, you want somebody who struggles. You want somebody who
Right.
makes their, every day they don't know which way they're going to move and they pick a direction and that could be over a
Mm-hmm.
cliff. And that's good
Yeah.
writing. Scary writing. It's what they
Yeah.
conflict is based on. Um, she's written what, like 2 stories in this series right now? Am I looking this right? Or 3? Embers and
I think
Ashes,
I think I think the
A
third
Torch
book has
Against the
just
Night,
recently.
Reaper at
The
the Gate
third
is
book
coming
has
out
just
this June.
yeah. Yep, that's
Yeah.
the most recent one.
It's interesting. Red, blue, and green are the covers
Mm-hmm.
designs. I wonder if that has anything to do with the story itself. Like Ember and Ashes is red, A Torch Against the Night is blue, and Reapers at the Gate is green.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
Well, because the first book focuses on Laya's character growth. And then the second one, though Laya continues to grow in book 2, the second one involves quite a bit more of character growth with the second main character. And so I imagine the third one is going to involve a lot more character growth with a third primary character.
I mean, I'm just looking at the covers here, but obviously, God, Leia. What's her name? Is it Leia? Leia.
Laya,
Leia.
at
She's
least how I
forefront
always say.
on the cover. She's right in the middle, and then on the
Mhm.
second book, it's her looking at the reader with another woman standing next to her and a guy standing between them. And in the third book, it's the blonde girl looking straight at the reader, and
Mhm.
the
Yep.
protagonist of the first book is off
So
looking at.
Laya is definitely the focus of book 1,
Mhm.
and then Elias is um, is given a much bigger role in book 2. So I imagine Helena has a or no, Helene. I think it's Helene. Um, she has, I imagine, a greater role in book 3.
So you really like this author, and this is what? How long has he been around? Not too long, right? In the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you compare her to?
Ooh. Um, right now, off the top of my head, I'd probably compare her to, at least in with regard to writing style, probably Susan Dennard, who's the author of Truthwitch. Um, Mostly because they both have um, a fairly full cast of characters, and each of the characters has quite a bit of character depth and growth within each book. Um, Not to mention the complexity of the overall plot. So,
Susan Dennard's a young lady too. I'm young.
yeah,
She's younger than me anyway. I mean, you're
yeah,
giving me names. I'm expecting to like pull up their websites and see some old lady writing for decades
right.
out there now, popular. But no, I mean, it seems like the market is filled with young authors, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe this is not politically correct, but they're not unattractive young authors either. And it's just very curious as to why that is.
Well, I'm sure there are fairly large marketing departments doing all they can to make sure they are looking the best that they can.
Right? Let's get talented, pretty people to sell our books. Um,
Well,
how is your work going? Your writing? Are you finished with your novel, or are you still working on it? How is the writing coming?
I am not finished yet. This past month has actually been somewhat crazy busy for me, so there hasn't been a whole lot of writing involved in this past month. But just yesterday, I've dived right back into it, so I'm hoping to get a lot of work done this next month. So
Yeah.
yeah,
When you
I
see
actually
this,
and one funny coincidence sort of with this particular book actually. I actually An Ember in the Ashes, I actually had to stop reading it about halfway through because so much of Laya's character is so incredibly similar to my main character. So I
how
kind
so?
of had one of those, oh my gosh, she's written my book, only she's written it 100 times better than me.
Oh,
So
that
why should I
sucks.
even try to keep
That's the
writing?
worst feeling on
So
the face of the planet, and it's
isn't
probably
it
not
though?
true. Yeah.
It's not. And all my writer friends in my writer group were like, had, spent like a whole day, like telling me absolutely every single thing about my book that is so completely different from An Ember in the Ashes. So eventually I did get over it, but still, that
I
was,
wrote a horrible short story a long time ago, posted it on a website called Zoetrope to get some feedback off of it. And then a few months later, or a year later, the movie The Butterfly Effect came out. It's like, oh my God, it's like my story all over the place. It wasn't. I think something's wrong with our writer brains. We just want to find the similarities in other people's work. Are you copying
right,
me? Am I copying you? We want to be as unique as possible.
right. Yeah,
So, Amber in the Ashes. Have you read A Torch Against the Night?
I have. I just recently finished A Torch Against the Night, which was fantastic.
It's difficult talking about these younger authors when they only have like two books because they don't really have much of a history. They're still very much hidden against who they actually are. I mean, if we look at
Right.
J.R.R. Tolkien, we know who that dude was. You know what I mean? He was a
Yeah.
Catholic. He was a World War I
Yeah.
veteran. We
Yeah.
know what what he's done and what he didn't do. People have opinions on him, written volumes and volumes on his work. When you see like a Sabaa Tahir who's just barely scratching the surface of her career, you're like, who are you, person? What are you trying to accomplish with your life? What is your life based on? I mean, is
Hmm.
Amber in the Ashes your Magnus opus? I mean, what is it expressing?
Hmm.
Is you as a person, as a either she's an immigrant, right, born in Pakistan, raised in the
Hmm.
Mojave Desert. What does this book say about her? Or is she just writing a story? I mean, that's basically my question. Are you just writing a story? Or are you telling us more about you and your experiences in this world?
Well, I think I think to a certain extent you can't, even when you are just trying to write an entertaining book, to a certain extent there are parts of you that you just can't avoid putting into your work. It'll
Write
just
what you know, right?
it'll come out whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, you want to write
Um,
what you know. That's the cliche. And it's not, about being a butcher or whatever. It's more about what's in your soul, what's in your thoughts, what's in
mhm.
your experiences.
Right.
And I just wonder, does it come out in this character? I mean, I wonder what her life was like growing up. I mean, I wonder because I live in New York, there's a gigantic Muslim community here. What is their experience being,
Mhm.
Middle Eastern in America, especially
Right.
since 9/11, right?
Right.
Or being at war in Afghanistan and at war in Iraq and
Mhm.
Syria happening in Europe. I don't know. This is very interesting, and I wonder if that kind of shows up here, or is she avoiding it entirely? Because fantasy kind of, I mean, with fantasy, it can turn into kind of a protection against who you really are, right? I mean, it gets you out of your
Mhm.
mind, it gets you out of your experiences.
Right.
I don't know. Um, who else? Who else?
Yeah.
You said, what's her face? Susan.
Susan
Dennard
Dennard.
reminds you
Mm-hmm.
of her writing, and they're totally two different people. Like Susan
Mm-hmm.
Dennard is a white girl, right? What is
Mm-hmm.
she? Let's see, Susan Dennard. I said bio. Oh, she's young too. My goodness. I'm so old. I'm getting so old. Life is going away too fast. She came from a small town in Georgia. She works in marine biology. She got to travel the world, 6 out of the 7 continents. I mean, this is a
Mm-hmm.
person who has not had much to struggle with, right? In terms of her young life, she has not had to worry about what food she's going to be eating if she's traveling to 6 out of the 7 continents. And you're saying that her work is very similar to the Pakistani-Americans' work who grew up in the Mojave Desert.
Well, on a very basic level, yeah.
I
Well,
wonder if
because
that has some,
when it comes right down to it, we're all human,
right?
and no matter our skin color, no matter our culture, no matter our religion, there is a certain aspect of all of us that is to a certain extent the same, because we are all human, and we all have the same experience, the same emotions, and all of that. So though it's important to embrace all of our differences, it is also important to embrace our similarities.
What does it, what are the similarities in the work between Dennard
um
and
well, like I
Tahir?
said, just the the size of the cast of characters. There are a lot of characters in both of their books, their series, and the overarching plot is very intricate and complex. And though each though each book does have its own um, its own unique plot, um, there is the overarching plot that is going on throughout the series.
Hmm.
So even as you finish each book and enjoy that satisfying resolution, there's still quite a bit left to explore within the next subsequent books. So,
I had a great conversation last night with an author in Canada, and we were discussing, how you got popular on Amazon. And she was telling me that there's actually as a mathematical equation that you could follow and get yourself on the top, percentage of authors that are getting attention. And I wonder if it's these novels, these works, these two women specifically, since we've already mentioned them, there's probably many others as well. I wonder if they're gaming the writing as well. There's a formula to this novel. They're very smart, they're very capable, and they put that formula to work for them, and they've made successful novels from them. They're not really trying to reach out of the box,
well,
so to speak, but they're they're
well,
they're writing this formula.
I doubt it's quite as systematic as that, but I wouldn't be surprised if quite a bit of it has to do with uh, analyzing the books they enjoy, studying the authors that they love, and figuring out what they are doing that that works for them, and utilizing that in the writing of their own books.
I guess again, it
Because
goes
when it
back
comes
to
right
what I
down
was
to
talking.
it, because the more honestly, the most important thing is to write a book you enjoy and that you want to read. Um, and I honestly, I would be inclined to say that that is probably the primary thing driving them.
Is Susan Dennard's character a woman of color as well? Main character in her
Um,
novels?
well, I
That has opened up her Twitter account and
it's mostly because there is no one main character
oh,
in
okay.
really in any of these books. Um there are two main female characters in Truth Witch, and then two male sort of main characters. They're not quite as main characters as the girls, but they are definitely primary characters. And it's been a little while since I've read it, but to the best of my knowledge, one of the girls is I'm not. I mean, it's such a unique um, culture that she's developed
Hmm.
with
Her
the
world
other
building is not. Are you talking about Tahir or are you talking about Dennard?
Dennard, because there's
Okay.
Safi and Izzy, and then the two male main characters who are also all four of them have incredibly different backgrounds and
Hmm.
um, ethnicities. So
Interesting. And she has a very limited Wikipedia as well. I just wonder in 50 years, will we be talking about these authors? Will they have cracked the genre and made it something new, or are they just revisiting what people have already done? I mean, we've talked about Kat, what's her name? The Hunger Games character already,
Cat
a bunch of other,
Katniss,
Katniss,
yeah.
Everdeen. Um, I mean, are they doing something new, or are they revisiting what has already been successful?
Well,
Are they revolutionizing the
I
world of fantasy? Not that it matters. I mean, I'm
well,
not
see, the idea
revolutionizing
of
anything either, but still, I'm
well, the
just
concept of
wondering.
doing something new is such a simplified idea because to a certain extent there is nothing new out there. It's
I would argue that to do
every
something new, you're just doing what you have in your soul. I mean, it's not new, it's you. You're 40 years old, you're 30 years
well,
old, you're just doing
it's one
whatever
thing to
inside yourself.
be unique and it's something else to be something new, at least to my way of thinking.
Are they
Um,
unique? Are they doing
Absolutely.
something that's going to set? I mean, I guess at the same time, I mean, I was thinking about time earlier and just the nature of our existence on this planet. And we're so based on what's come before, the steps of previous generations and whatnot. And I guess just the small little incremental differences between these women writing and the women that came before them. What's her name? Susan, who wrote the Hunger Game books? Susan
Oh,
Collins?
Suzanne
No,
Collins. Hmm.
Suzanne Collins. I mean, she's pretty brand new. I mean, she based that kind of off of Orson Scott Card's work and whatnot. I mean, there weren't really many examples of that type of story before she started writing that, but now we have more of those kind of children at war game type novelizations.
Hmm.
Are they writing something new? Are they right? I mean, that's my main question here. Are these books unique in terms of what they've tried to establish in their career so far?
I think there are extremely unique elements within each of them.
But the story itself is pretty much following that hero's journey, not really deviating too much from it.
Well, not necessarily. There are elements of the hero's journey, but there are lots of elements of other things as well,
Hmm.
which is what makes it unique. And on another level, I'm not so sure that it's necessarily being unique that defines bestsellers like Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings and
That's a really good
these
example to
sort of
bring up.
things.
I mean, in terms of Harry Potter, right? Because that was a unique series of books. That first one kind of blew me away in terms of how incredibly interesting the world was she had created.
Well, except that the hero's journey is not at all unique in some respects. I mean,
No, I
that the
mean it's been
hero's
around
journey
for a
has been
while.
around for forever and ever.
When Joseph Campbell
So,
wrote that in what 1871, or
right.
no,
So at what
who
point,
wrote that?
you know,
Go ahead.
so how unique can something like Harry Potter actually be?
I mean,
Especially
we're talking
when,
when you talk about Harry Potter and when you talk about these women as well, you need to talk about the world building, right? Because that's kind of the ingredients that are being fed into that hero's journey. The main characters search for whatever it is they're looking for. I mean,
well, I
it
think when it
operates
comes
within
down
that
to
world.
it, it's, I mean, as far as how successful a book becomes, what it comes down to, I think, is the book's ability to relate to the readers. So
100%,
and
right? Because you want
right.
to be able to identify, and you don't want to be. I mean, if you're looking for a comfort read, you don't want to be challenged too much.
Mhm.
And when we're looking back on the Lord of the Rings, that's a good example of classic fantasy storytelling that has basically defined the whole genre. Without J.R. Tolkien, we wouldn't have what we have today,
Mhm.
regardless of gender or whatnot. But if you
See,
look at his life, you see how it kind of mirrored in that story. I mean, his experiences in World
right.
War One really haunted
Right.
his entire existence. When I read, I did not read it unfortunately because I have thousands of books I'm trying to read. But
Right.
and if man, there's too many. People need to stop writing. Let me catch up.
I
Let me
know.
catch up
Yeah.
a little bit. An Amber in the Ashes. Does that reflect Sabaa Tahir's existence on this planet, or does it just follow a paint by numbers? This is how you write an epic fantasy story, which seems to be everybody out there has got this paint by numbers book.
Well, it's not just about whether it reflects her own experience, but I think more so whether she's managed to capture the essence of the 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 experience of humanity in general.
Does she? And is she
I
writing that kind of profound work of fiction that it does
well, it
echo the struggle of humanity? Because I mean, that honestly is what I'm asking. Because is she, as the person that she is, if she struggled in the Mojave Desert growing up, who she was with her parents, who they were in the lifestyle that she had, I mean, I don't know. Did she go to UCLA under some kind of scholarship, or did her parents pay the in-state tuition, or something along those lines? You know what I mean? There's an easy path in life, and then there's an incredibly difficult path filled with pain and injury and whatnot. Did she
well,
suffer?
and there's well, and without meeting her in person, without actually speaking to her,
But you
it's
did though, right?
difficult
You
to know
read
exactly.
100,000 words that she wrote. So basically, in a way, you got to see inside her mind. Does that come off there? I mean, when you're looking at that main character, which is, I think, one of the things that you want to talk about the most about her was that main character. She was very compelling to you, right? You love that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, you love that she's a coward who learns how to be brave, and
Hmm.
that's unique, right? I mean, did this
It's
woman?
unique to me because I've read a number of YA fantasy that seem to revolve around very similar young girls who their character growth usually seems to be learning how to slow down, how to think things through,
Mhm.
as opposed to, but you don't seem to see a whole lot of characters learning how to stop overthinking things and just get the work done and just
I think we
step out.
mentioned Katniss Everdeen being kind of hard boiled in the beginning of those series, and I don't think that really ever changes for her all the way through, other than, like you said, slowing down and thinking
Hmm.
things through and figuring out how the world is interacting with her.
Right.
She doesn't become brave. She was already brave. She was already kind
Exactly.
of morally stand upish.
Hmm.
But this person is a coward who does not want to enter the world that's calling for her. And she
Right.
has to learn how to be brave because she's being forced to interact with that world.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
And that um in essence is I personally feel what makes this book so much more unique.
What about the other character, Helene?
Um, it's hard to say with her, mostly because she hasn't had a huge part to play in the overall story yet. But I know um, I know she's got a journey ahead of her.
Mm.
Um,
But she's not a coward trying to be brave.
no,
That
no,
doesn't
not
come
at
off at
all.
all. Is
No.
she a warrior that's always a warrior? She has the skills and all that good stuff. She's the Katniss Everdeen in this story.
A bit. Yeah, she's the warrior, um, sort of learning to come into her own.
Hmm.
learning how to not just follow orders, but to give her own, and learning how to use her talent, use her abilities the right way.
And to go back to Susan Dennard, which the only reason I even mentioned her is because, you know, you brought her up in comparison to Tahir. I don't know, how many books has she written? Where's her bibliography?
Well,
That's not good.
she's most known for the Witchland series, but
Witchland, okay.
several years before that, she'd written the Something Wicked and Deadly. I think is what it's called.
Wow.
Um, she'd written that series before, which she recently put out a video talking about the learning experience she had with that, because that series of books did not do well at first. Um, in fact, I don't know if she actually, I don't know if she even finished them before Truth Witch came out.
Mm-hmm.
Because after Truth Witch came out, that she then her publishers then came out with new covers for all of the Something Wicked and Deadly books, and suddenly they started selling better because she'd done so well with Truth Witch.
It's very interesting. If you go to her Wikipedia page, it doesn't have any of her books on here. You know, like an author will have like a list of books that they've written. It's frustrating. I can't see the list. So she's written a bunch at 33 years old. She's written what sounds like 6 novels or whatever.
Yeah.
And Truth Witch is the Witchland's #1, and she's got 2 books in that series right now. So let's do a comparison then between the main character of Truth Witch and the main character of An Amber in the Ashes.
So
An Amber in the Ashes.
Truth Witch features Sophia and Iseult. Pardon me if I'm saying that wrong.
Well, you know, you do a really good job with these character names. You do an awesome. I don't like the way I pronounce names in my head as I'm reading is they're usually 1,000 times wrong, just completely wrong. So right. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed.
Well, yeah. Anyway, well, no, speaking of pronunciations, according to Brandon Sanderson, the Shannara series, apparently when Terry Brooks first wrote them, they were supposed to be pronounced the Shannara series.
Shannara.
Like Brandon Sanderson actually talked to Terry Brooks about it, and he said, yeah, they're pronounced Shannara. So Brandon Sanderson always called it the Shannara series. Only then they came out with the TV series. Ugh. And so Terry Brooks was, so he talked to Terry again about it, and he's like, yeah, well, everyone seemed to, get hooked on calling him Shannara. So I sort of changed my mind. And Brandon's like, oh my gosh. What am I supposed to do now? Is it Shannara? Is it Shannara?
I've been fighting for that pronunciation my entire life. You've made it meaningless. That was a great book. I love that guy. Terry Brooks is one of my favorites.
Right. So anyway, so Truth Witch, it's really not Safi or Izzy. It's really both of them. They're neither one is more of a main character than the other, which is, I think, was incredibly intentional on Susan Dennard's part, because a huge theme within the Truth Witch or the Witchlands books has been the focus on sister relationships. Because even though Safi and Izzy aren't biologically sisters, she calls them their thread sisters, which is so when it comes to the magic system, they are connected on a spiritual level that is, I mean, it's a bit like having a best friend that feels like your sister, or a brother, someone who's not biologically related to you, but they might as well be, just because of how much you connect with them. And so that's the sort of relationship that she's focused on within at least Truthwitch, if not the entire series. Um, and so what I find so fascinating about that book is that Safi is, is so much that very common YA heroine, the, you know, jump in without thinking, just hardly any fear, or at least, so much courage that she might as well not be afraid, and just gets things done. But then you have Izzy, who is almost completely her opposite. She always has to think things through, and she's basically the brains of their whole. Safi can think on her feet so much better than Izzy can. Izzy needs some space. She needs time to think things through and figure things out before she can
Mm-hmm.
act on anything. So the fact that they both complement each other so well, and so in Truthwitch they end up getting separated towards the beginning of the story, and then about halfway through they're reunited, and it's so fascinating to see how she illustrates the kind of the differing mistakes that each makes when they're out on their own, and then when they come back together and suddenly they're able to pull things off because they have each other, where because the strengths of one outweigh the make up for the weaknesses of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And which personally I found really fascinating. So when it comes to comparison to An Ember in the Ashes, I suppose you get maybe a little bit of that with Laia and Elias.
Oh, the male character.
To a certain extent, you see a little bit more of that in the second book, mostly because the first book is primarily about um, Laia's character arc and her growth. So, as far as themes go, they are both really pretty different, but I mean, those are both my current favorites right now. So,
Are you an author that wants to write a series, or are you just trying to write a novel, a story?
it depends on the story. My current work in progress is the first book in a planned trilogy. Um, and then I have another story idea that I've done a little bit of work on, which right now is just a standalone book, but the way it's plotted out, it could easily turn into not that I'm comparing myself to these authors, but as far as structure goes, it could easily turn into a Clive Cussler or, um, uh, shoot, what's that other author? Just the each book stands alone, but there's potential for additional books that also stand alone but are within the same
My
universe
God,
and
Clive
involve the
Cussler's
same.
86 years old.
Yes, like I said, I was not comparing myself to him, but as far as the structure of that particular idea goes, that's kind of where I see that possibly going. Oh, sort of like an Indiana Jones kind of feel.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, each movie stands on its own and is not necessarily very much affected by any of the other. I mean, you could watch each one on its own and it would make sense, but they are the same characters in each one. So as far as structure goes, that's how that one could potentially go.
Now I'm looking at pictures of Clive Cussler. He's an interesting looking dude. Looks like he's drunk in this picture. Anyway, so yeah, that's interesting. So in terms of your writing, you want to write series. You're setting out to do that when nature calls, basically. You're
Well,
not
right
trying to
now,
force it, but right now.
right.
I'm really interested in the career that these women have set up for themselves because, you know, indie publishers kind of do the same thing where they just write series. right? They just try to pump as many words out into the world as they possibly can. And it seems kind of like traditional publishing is taking note and saying, okay, we're going to do the same thing. You know, people don't want to wait decades for the next book to come out. You know, what's his
Mm-hmm.
name? The the King Killer Chronicles or whatever, where we're waiting almost more than a decade now for the third book. That's annoying. So they want people who can produce the work that they promise they're going to produce. And
Right.
the more work they produce, the more they're going to buy. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
mentioning, that woman in Canada last night said, you know, if you write many books every single year, you're going to end up at the top of Amazon's bestseller list because your name is always constantly there. They love new releases more than they love anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. But would you recommend that people read Sabaa Tahir?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating book. And like I've said throughout this whole conversation, I honestly, you can relate to Laya whether you have dark skin or not, which is
Which is a great character development, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what she looks
exactly
like, but
exactly
when you're reading the book, you can picture yourself in that same exact situation, whether you have brown skin or no skin.
right. Yeah.
It's very interesting. And then you've introduced me to Susan Dennard. What is going on with these people's Wikipedia pages? There's no information here. I am interested in
Well, they're
seeing
so they're so new too.
exactly right. I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen with their careers going forward. Are they going to stick to it? Are they going to continue to write these novels? Are they going to do anything interesting that's going to pop and explode and the world's going to be like, whoa? Or are they going to just kind of be in this kind of interesting little area of fantasy writing, making money, right? Being
Who
successful, but
knows?
not being like mind blowingly. I don't know what I'm looking for here. What do you think?
Well, I think I've heard it said that bestsellers are what, like 10% talent and 90% luck, you know. Like I'm well, for instance, how many fantasy books had been written before The Lord of the Rings came out, and suddenly now fantasy is a huge thing.
Mhm.
So was it just that, you know,
Well,
well,
I would argue
or
that fantasy was all.
sort of like how the um okay, well, you're actually older than me, so you might actually
How
remember
dare
this,
you?
but
How dare you?
whatever. um because there was the Palm Pilot, which which just did not take off because it hit the market too early. The market was not ready for something like that.
Mhm.
So then when so they had to wait. So part of it honestly is just writing the right book at the right time when the market is ready for it,
No,
which
that's true. And you really can't time it. You just got to write the
you
book that you're
you really
writing and
can't.
then hope.
Actually I think I've heard one of my favorite Pixar um director, Brad Bird. Um, there's a featurette that he made for the movie Ratatouille, which I have watched so many times. It's just so incredibly inspiring. And in it, at one point, he says, if you think about it logically, you are trying to create something that audiences will enjoy 2 years from now, which
Yeah.
you just can't do. You can't make that happen logically. So what you have to do is you have to think about what do I enjoy? What makes me happy? What do I want to read right now? And that's the best you can do.
A lot
So
of people have problems with deciding what to write because of that exact thing. You know, how do I put this math together to make this a successful book in
right?
2 years when I'm finished writing it? You know, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think Sabaa Tahir did that. I think she did something different. I think she's looking at what people are doing that are successful on Amazon, and she's managed to make that work for her career. And I think the other woman as well. There's definitely a movement. If you can move your way through a novel and you can produce clean content and you understand how the mechanics of a story work, you're in a good spot in terms of getting to success.
Yeah.
And according to the woman I talked to last night, you can manipulate Amazon to make you seem more popular than what you really are. Just publish lots and lots of work, and next thing you know, you're making money, I guess.
There you go.
So hurry up, finish your novel.
Right.
And the next one, for that matter.
Let's see how all my kids hear that particular.
Yeah, I know it's tough. You have to find the time.
Yeah.
Do you think that we have talked Ms. Tahir into the have we said enough? Is there anything left to say?
I don't think so. I think we've covered just about all of it.
It would be interesting if we got back together in 10 years and did another podcast on Sabaa Tahir and determine how exactly her career is working out. I mean, obviously, I'm going to be aware of her now, so I'm going to be paying attention and seeing how things work out. Maybe I'll actually try to read An Amber in the Ashes. Is it a YA fantasy, or is it just a fantasy?
It's a YA fantasy.
It's YA fantasy. Okay, interesting. All right. Well, man, I really appreciate you being willing to come on the show tonight and discuss this author with me.
Yeah, it was fun.